seemed like there were no hospitals or doctors, or I don't want to say doctors, but let's just say the zeitgeist of the medical world in general was not interested in any solutions for treatment of the sickness. So you were looking at how do we actually treat this thing with things like hydroxychloroquine, which the media demonized as not being helpful, but also having all these side effects, and you would say that was not true.
Well, it was actually even worse than this. Former President Trump said this could be a game changer. The most published microbiologist in the world, Didier Riault from France, said, listen, I'm testing this in the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It looks like it works. At that moment, it was crushed. The FDA said, do not use hydroxychloroquine. Rick Bright, who was on the other side of this, did everything he could to block hydroxychloroquine. The federal authorities in Australia seize it and they destroy hydroxychloroquine. They destroy it. It wasn't just an idea. We were making giant steps forward with hydroxychloroquine. It was safe and it was modestly effective and it was crushed.
Why do you think they crushed it?
I think it was intentional in order to promote fear, suffering, hospitalization, and death, to promote these things in order to prepare the population to accept only one option, and that was mass vaccination.
And so they're putting all of this fear, like you said, but then you have these very simple options. And so now we're taking those options from people, waiting until people are so sick that they're hospitalized, and then only giving them an option that isn't going to help them but could actually make the problem worse.
It's December 10th, 2020. How did they know the products were safe and effective? We can make the human body stronger and more resilient. We can actually improve upon God's creation. It's the ultimate hubris of the arrogance of man expressed in medical science. It's the ultimate. The winners are the ones who didn't take it. People have had 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 doses of it. Every single dose, they get worse and worse and worse, and they get more recurrent infection.
And if there's any spiritual encouragement that you could give our audience, I'd really appreciate it.
Light over darkness. That's always the way. It's always a small number with eyes to see and ears to hear.
I want you to speak to the person right now. They might have gotten this inoculation. You have created a protocol to actually help people detoxify from this situation. So if you could please just speak to that person right now about how they can get access to that.
It's somewhere between 75 and 80% of Americans took this.
That's insane.
According to CDC, COVID states, we're trying to get an estimate on this, it's probably 95% of Australians.
Oh my goodness.
So those who have taken it, there's great concern. It's called McCullough protocol-based spike detoxification, and we have a risk stratification approach.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Directed Life. This is a really unique episode. I get to be with Dr. Peter McCullough, and little do people know, because the documentary that we did together, The Time Is Now, we released it in 2021. This was when censorship was at an all-time high. Twitter did not yet belong to Elon Musk. So I actually scrubbed my name from the documentary as the director, but you and I, we actually met together. We did an interview with you for that documentary. And what we were really doing was trying to show the opposite narrative that the mainstream media wasn't showing us regarding all things pandemic. And so we are here, I guess, 3 years later, and so much has happened even over the past couple of weeks and months that I think I was in Dallas. I was like, hey, we have to get together and get a follow-up interview about what's been going on. But before we dive into that, you have to give the audience an understanding of your background, because you are one of the most decorated and learned doctors in your profession. And I think that's what makes your story and what happened to you really special for people to understand. So buckle up, because when he shares with you why he is worth listening to, it's a long list of credentials. So could you please share?
Well, first, it's great to be back with you. Great to be on the program with the audience. I just came from seeing patients. And as you've pointed out, I'm late because patient care comes first. I'm a practicing internist and cardiologist. I have degrees from Baylor here in Texas, University of Texas Southwestern, University of Michigan, and Southern Methodist University. I am academically engaged, heart and kidney disease research my entire career. Until the pandemic, I turned my research and clinical focus towards SARS-CoV-2 infection, and later on, what's happened with the COVID-19 vaccines. I realized that the world needed scholarship, it needed clinical excellence, and the world needed guidance on how to navigate through all this. So I've amassed now over 700 peer-reviewed publications in the National Library of Medicine citations, 70 of which, 10% of which are on the pandemic and pandemic-related issues. I have given grand rounds at every major medical center in the United States. I've testified before the Senate on 3 occasions, led 2 of the major COVID-19 vaccine Senate hearings. I testified in the U.S. House of Representatives with the panels, European Parliament, and given, 200 public programs now where people come in person and we review what happened and what people need to do now.
So before all of that, I feel like that's kind of God's way of redeeming your career basically fell apart when the whole COVID thing went down. You were one of the, if not the most published cardiologist in the entire country. So I want you guys to understand, Dr. Peter McCullough is not a quack. He's not a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. This guy is actually one of the most rigorous scholars and contributors to the world of modern medicine in America. Is that true or false, by the way?
Yeah, I was the editor of Cardiorenal Medicine, which is an area that, in a sense, I helped develop heart and kidney disease, reviews in cardiovascular medicine. I published the textbook in Braunwald's Textbook of Cardiology, which is the Bible of cardiology. That's out of Harvard on this topic. I am now the editor-in-chief of Cardiovascular Innovation and Research, a new cardiovascular journal. And I've just dedicated my life to scholarship. I can tell you in my areas of inquiry, there's been big advances in vitro diagnostics, therapeutics, and with COVID-19, I've published McCullough Protocol, which is copyrighted in my name, the most widely used treatment approach to help people stay out of the hospital and avoid hospitalizations and deaths with acute COVID. I've now published and promulgated McCullough Protocol base spike detoxification. Again, the most widely used and successful approach for people to handle what's happened to their bodies after the vaccines. And my career has taken a turn, but I think the way to think about it, Kap, is that my career has entered a much more important phase now.
I agree with that.
Now the stakes are even higher. It's not incremental steps forward. Now they're big step forwards. And T.S. Kuhn wrote in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, 1968, that medicine and science advances in this kind of inching phase. I was inching along, making important contributions in the field of heart and kidney disease. But then suddenly we hit an inflection point where, boom, there's a big unmet need and somebody fills it, and it was me. And that's when the arc of things for humanity changed greatly. And that's the term that was coined called paradigm shift. There was a paradigm shift in the way people were thinking about the virus, that it was unassailable. People just had to wait in misery until they're hospitalized and meet their fate. Paradigm shift, no, treat it early and knock it out early, prevent hospitalizations and deaths. And now with the vaccines, clearly lots of messaging there on safety of the vaccines, failure of theoretical efficacy, and what we need to do. So in many ways, my professional situation has changed, as many have. It's not just me, but far more important work.
So can you share a little bit about how, did you get fired for the previous place that you were working? Are you free to talk about that?
I am under 2 separation agreements. I think it's fair to say I was a professor of medicine, highly ranked at an academic medical center.
We can't say which one?
My contract was not renewed for no reason. My releases were for no stated reason. I negotiated settlement agreement, had a lawsuit that I successfully defended, and now I'm navigating other bodies because we are in an era of censorship and reprisal. If anybody stands in the way of this global narrative, they're going to be professionally damaged.
So I'm reading between the lines, and I appreciate we want to protect the situation that you're in. But so let's just say coincidentally, serendipitously, you were let go. Meanwhile, what were you doing? What were you doing that you feel like, was oddly in line of the timing of you being released?
I obtained research funding. I studied hydroxychloroquine with an FDA-approved investigational drug application in my name. I published some of the most widely referenced papers on pandemic issues. I testified in the U.S. Senate on 2 occasions. I became a frequent contributor on Fox News and Newsmax and Real America's Voice. I was on ABC News. I've been on many hundreds of different podcasts, a very prominent one with Joe Rogan.
Yep,
but also,
saw that.
You got Joe Rogan started down this pathway, got Tucker Carlson started down this pathway. And to this day, what I am known for is being accurate, citing the data, and then ultimately being correct on these big issues.
So the hydroxychloroquine situation, was that kind of the beginning of this where, and what we're talking about, if you remember 4 years ago, pandemic sweeps the world. One of the things that I remember from our interview that was really stunning to me was that it seemed like there were no hospitals or doctors, or I don't want to say doctors, but let's just say the zeitgeist of the medical world in general was not interested in any solutions for treatment of the sickness. It was more like once you go to the hospital, that's when we'll put you on a ventilator or whatever, and remdesivir, all that sort of stuff. And so you were looking at how do we actually treat this thing with things like hydroxychloroquine, which the media demonized as not being helpful, but also having all these side effects. And you would say that was not true.
Well, it was actually even worse than this.
Okay.
Where there were data from the first SARS pandemic saying, listen, hydroxychloroquine is going to have an antiviral effect. In fact, Anthony Fauci said that. Former President Trump said this could be a game changer. The most published microbiologist in the world, Didier Rialt from France, said, listen, I'm testing this in the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It looks like it works. And Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit did a 1,000+ patient study, and hydroxychloroquine reduced mortality in patients, particularly when treated early in Detroit, reduced mortality. And at that moment, after it had essentially assured us that we were good with hydroxychloroquine, at that moment it was crushed. The FDA said, do not use hydroxychloroquine. The Australian TGA said, do not use hydroxychloroquine. We had a U.S. stockpile of hydroxychloroquine. Peter Navarro in the White House wanted to release it. Peter reached out to me. Rick Bright, who was on the other side of this, did everything he could to block hydroxychloroquine. Rick Bright later on joins the Rockefeller Foundation, a vaccine promoter. Clive Palmer in Australia procures enough hydroxychloroquine to actually treat the entire country of Australia. The federal authorities in Australia seize it and they destroy hydroxychloroquine. They destroy it. We could have used it for malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, or another. So it's even worse than what people think. It wasn't just an idea. We were making giant steps forward with hydroxychloroquine. It was safe, and it was modestly effective, and it was crushed.
Why do you think they crushed it?
They crushed it for the same, that was in 2020. For the same reasons why in 2021, they crushed an even more successful drug, ivermectin. And in Pierre Corey's book, The War on Ivermectin, probably the best titled book, it lays it out here. Hydroxychloroquine crushed in the first year. Ivermectin crushed in the second year of the pandemic. Why?
And these are very common drugs, right?
Common, generic, widely available, used for multiple purposes. And they were crushed for the following reason, is that I think it was intentional in order to promote fear, suffering, hospitalization, death, to promote these things in order to prepare the population to accept only one option, and that was mass vaccination.
Wow. Dark. Really dark.
What other conclusion can we draw? Because in my book, Courage to Face COVID-19, we have learned so much. We now understand that all the nasal sprays and gargles were crushed. There were nasal sprays and gargles, iodine and xylitol-based gargles that were clearly reducing the intensity and duration of symptoms. They were actually preventing COVID-19. Randomized trial by Baumforth and colleagues with xylitol. It was better than a vaccine. We're talking nasal sprays and gargles. The Federal Trade Commission came out with a COVID misinformation policy and immediately sued every company that had a promising over-the-counter approach for COVID-19. Nasal sprays, nutraceuticals and supplements, prominently vitamin D. Eric Naputi hit with a giant federal case against him for vitamin D. We saw monoclonal antibodies. Now, these were high-tech, emergency use authorized, very expensive, government authorized products that were safe and effective. And I used them to the best extent I could in McCullough protocol, one by one taken off the market within a few weeks of being entered on the market because of theoretical concerns they may not work. Everything was suppressed. Other repurposed drugs, colchicine. Colchicine is a drug we used in gout and in pericarditis for years. There's been now a network meta-analysis of 39 other meta-analyses, large trials, including the Corona trial, 30% reduction in mortality with colchicine, which we extended for 30 days during treatment, suppressed. Hospitals never used it. And the list goes on and on. Everything that was safe and effective that we used in a multi-drug protocol on day one at home was effectively crushed by the CDC, the NIH, the FDA, the Federal Trade Commission. And
my goodness,
and
that's
the health
insane.
systems were sending out emails, don't use any of these. Don't use any of these. Wait till the patient is hospitalized. Still don't do anything. And then when the patient can't breathe and needs oxygen, start remdesivir as the lead drug. Now, remdesivir was the first intravenous that was EUA approved. But within a few months, we knew it didn't work. The World Health Organization looked at this and said, you know what? It doesn't work. Don't use remdesivir. Don't. It doesn't work, and it can cause some kidney damage and liver damage. That was in November of 2020. When the WHO said that, everyone should have stopped using remdesivir. What we do in the United States, HHS actually incentivized hospitals to use a drug that the World Health Organization and the world knew didn't work.
Oh my God.
WHO research group Solidarity reviewed this again a year and a half later, May of 2022, and said there are more studies. Were we wrong on remdesivir? They concluded we are right to begin with. We should have never used it.
If you're an individual who loves my perspective on things happening in the world, particularly through a spiritual perspective, but you're not able to easily get a hold of me in the comments on YouTube or on Instagram or other social media profiles, trust me, I also feel very frustrated about that. I try my best to respond to all of them as quickly as possible, but with the amount that comes through, it becomes very challenging. But I have an option for you. If you're very serious about getting my expert advice on anything related to entrepreneurship, relationships, social media, current events, or even anything spiritual at all, I've just created a profile on an app called Connect, and this will allow you to connect with me via text message or video message, or even schedule a video call, and I can respond to you in as little as 24 hours. So my invitation to you is to go to Connect.com or download the Connect app to your phone. Search my name, it's pretty easy to find, Kap Chatfield, KAPCHATFIELD. And feel free to ask me any question. I would love to be able to answer that question for you as soon as possible. So please do that today. You can download the app from any app store, or you can click the link in the description of this episode or this video to ask me any question on Connect today. Now, back to the episode.
I just feel like that's criminal. Like, you have Like, am I wrong? Am I wrong for having such an emotional response to what you're saying in regards to you have the way I see this, because you're in the world of medicine, I'm in the world of media. When I look at what happened in 2020, it was the biggest marketing campaign I've ever seen. You know, I've done marketing campaigns for companies and things and organizations, churches, things like that. So you're thinking of like flyers, ads, video content, and then it was like for a period of time, you couldn't walk anywhere without giant billboards about masking up, putting this, this thing in your arm. And then there's this like undercurrent of anger and fear of people. If you weren't wearing a mask, all of a sudden you're public enemy number one. And so they're putting all of this fear, like you said, but then you have these very simple options that some of them, like ivermectin, won a Nobel Prize for its ability to help people globally. And so now we're taking those options from people, waiting until people are so sick that they're hospitalized, and then only giving them an option that isn't going to help them but could actually make the problem worse. How is that not criminal in my mind?
To this day, there's no chief of medicine in the United States or anywhere in the world who's willing to step out and say that was the right approach. There's not a single hospital in our country or anywhere in the world that claims to be a center of excellence for treating COVID. The only reason why that can be the case is they know they didn't do the best they could for patients. They know that. There's a principle called medication reconciliation, which says if patients are on drugs at home and they get sicker, they should always continue those drugs through the hospital. They have the right to do that. So if we had started them on ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, nasal sprays and gargles, colchicine, prednisone, etc., they should have been continued in the hospital. Dr. J.J. Roster from Florida published the ICON study in chest in 2020, ivermectin. It reduced mortality by 50% for hospitalized patients. Every single patient in the United States should have received ivermectin during their hospital stay. Every single patient hospitalized in the United States should have received upfront monoclonal antibodies in the ER. They were safe and effective. We had bought enough monoclonal antibodies for every sick person in the United States to receive them. And sadly, a tiny fraction of people received early treatment. Now, those who were blessed enough to get early treatment, most widely used was McCullough protocol. They weren't hospitalized and they didn't die. They survived. And in my practice, I treated people in their 90s, people on oxygen at home, all these medical problems, heart failure, atrial fibrillation, emphysema, and I pulled them through. Sadly, we heard stories about people, in their 50s and 60s, many times with obesity, diabetes, other problems, getting no early treatment and then succumbing in the hospital. Here in Dallas, it was 2-to-1 African Americans and Hispanics dying over Caucasians. And it was a tragedy. It was because of lack of access to early treatment.
Wow. Okay. So your hypothesis, which I would, looking at this, from an outsider's perspective, it seems like it's true that the only thing that they were really trying to do is to get people to comply to this jab, basically. If we're trying to be careful with the language we're using for YouTube, we love you. But here we are. Now it's crazy. It's crazy that we actually have to be that careful with the language we're using because there's such a clamp down on the narrative. It's like the narrative is these things work, they're good. In fact, there were so many different things being like discussed and bills being, passed around about if you want to fly domestically, you need to have, a vaccine card. And if you want to work in a company of 100 or more people, it's like, it was insane. And what do you think is the motive behind that?
Well, let me ask you, it's December 10th, 2020. How did they know the products were safe and effective? There was only 1 month of administering them, shot 1, shot 2. Then there's only 2 months of observation.
I can't imagine there's a lot of data to be able to see if they're safe. Especially with long-term results.
There were no reductions in hospitalizations and deaths. They were sparse. Intent to treat principles weren't followed. There wasn't equal testing. Lots of sources of bias. We were told a 90% reduction in just the binary occurrence of getting the upper respiratory symptoms. How did anybody know on month 4 what was going to happen? How did they know? They couldn't have known. Here's the point. What's unique about this product class is an ideology, and it goes back hundreds of years. And it starts out with smallpox, and then rabies, and measles, and polio. And it goes like this. It says, listen, human beings are frail, vulnerable to infectious disease threats, and through the brilliance of mankind, through this form of science, we can make the human body stronger and more resilient. We can actually improve upon God's creation. It's the ultimate hubris of the arrogance of man expressed in medical science. It's the ultimate. And this has gone on for 300 and 400 years, and it is a religion. It's not questioned. In medical school, you're simply told, listen, here's the schedule, give it. Don't review any studies. Don't review any safety information. As safety issues have come up over history with smallpox, and particularly with polio and the cellular pertussis vaccines, no, there's no discussion. In fact, the manufacturers are immune from liability. If there's problems, sorry. And so this ideology says, listen, these aren't perfect products, but we believe in them like a religion in medical science. We're talking doctors, nurses, public health officials, like religion. They're not perfect, but in order for this to work, everybody must take them. And if some individuals are harmed or sadly lose their lives, sorry, they have to take it for the betterment of humanity. That is how this religion goes. And anybody who questions this religion is out. And it's very important. So if I was to walk into a medical grand rounds and say, listen, I'm concerned about product safety here. If people were pleasant to me, they'd say, listen, we don't want to talk about it. If they were a little less present, they say, get out. It's no different than me going into a mosque and saying things that are anti-Islamic. I'd be shown the door. These products are taken as religion. So that's what's going on here. It's taken as religion, and now you pour massive financial incentivization on deeply held religious beliefs, and it's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
So the people that are bought into this religion, interesting phrasing, I think we'll probably circle back to that towards the end of the episode here, but there's the part of the narrative of this religion is that this is for the common good, and that this is even for your good. That this, what's interesting though is the narrative began with, this is to protect grandma, this is to protect yourself. Over time though, the narrative started to shift to, oh, this actually doesn't help you from catching it, but it does help you from spreading it. And then that evolved into, well, it doesn't help you from catching it or from spreading it, and that's kind of where it left off. And then it was like, but then still get the boost, and then get the third boost and the fourth boost. And
without any end in sight.
So my question though is, you are treating patients currently. Are you seeing that the patients who have taken that, are they doing better? Or has it not really done anything? Or
they're doing far worse. Paper by Shretha and colleagues, Cleveland Clinic, 51,000 Cleveland Clinic employees. The winners are the ones who didn't take it. People have had 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5 doses of it. Every single dose, they get worse and worse and worse, and they get more recurrent infection.
So what do the symptoms look like for those that it's getting worse for? And maybe there's people, and as a doctor, you have, just so you guys know, you have a ton of empathy for people that were basically duped into doing this. And so there's no shame. But if you're hearing this and some of these symptoms that you're going to talk about are connected to what you're experiencing, that's important for them to realize.
Right. So the Shretha paper just looked at recurrent upper respiratory infection due to SARS-CoV-2. So the point is, the workers who keep getting the pandemic illness over and over again are the ones who've taken the most doses. The healthiest are the people who didn't take it, and they get natural immunity and they fight it off fine. You can get a mild case, but it actually makes the problem worse chronically over time. We have examples now with President Biden. He's taken 6 of them, he's had the recurrent infection over.
That's what I was actually thinking. I was like, because they keep on putting out on Twitter every time he catches it, and I thought I actually tweeted it back, and I said, it's interesting that you have publicly shared how you have gotten COVID as many times as you've gotten the boost.
Yeah,
basically.
And there's never been an illness where you get it, then you take an inoculation, then you get it again, you take another. It becomes this endless cycle. Now, it's bad enough that essentially the products don't work, essentially. And, our CDC director came out August 8th of 2021, and said, announcement, they don't stop spread of the infection. There was overwhelming evidence they didn't stop spread of infection. So someone who just took it gets the illness and just spreads it to their grandmother. That was happening wide open. The CDC said, listen, we have to tell America they don't stop spreading. At that point in time, there never should have been a single mandate for anybody to take it, because the only reason why an employer or a school or an athletic team or the military would ever require it was that if it reduced spread. In fact, you wouldn't want somebody to take it and then conceal it and go spread it to somebody else.
Sure.
But in fact, that's exactly what happened. The Biden mandates came in the fall. Even the NFL mandated it for pro players after the CDC announced it didn't stop transmission.
Now you have some other things. You've had a lot of, not you necessarily, but you see these things populating on social media of connections to the jab and myocarditis, which was apparently a massive conspiracy. But now Dr. Fauci has recently come out saying, no, actually, we knew that this would possibly be a side effect. And it's almost like he's covering his tracks. That's what it looks like. So I'm not trying to accuse. I'm just observable phenomenon here. Is this true that there's a connection between that and the inoculation?
My stomach got sick when it was released, a slide from an internal NIH, CDC, FDA meeting in October of 2020. Before the products finished their trials, there was a slide saying, these are the side effects that we anticipate: myocarditis, blood clots, paralysis with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and the list goes on and on. It was fully expected and on a government public health agency slide in October of 2020. Now, they get EUA approved in December 10th of 2020, and they get released onto the market. By June of 2021, the CDC and FDA are holding emergency meetings. It causes heart damage. Now, and to make it worse, the people suffering heart damage, 90% were boys, and they were young. Young people in their teenage years, early 20s. And sadly, New England Journal of Medicine, first authors Verma and colleagues in the summer of 2021 reported a fatal case at Washington University Medical Center in St. Louis, a fatal case in New England Journal of Medicine. And then they started pouring in. We had Gil and colleagues, 2 boys, aged 16 and 17 in Connecticut. They take it on days 3 and 4 after taking one of the products. They're found dead in bed by their parents. They're perfectly healthy teenagers found dead in bed. They demand autopsies, which is the right thing. They call in University of Michigan, University of Minnesota, pathologists, they review. They conclude fatal myocarditis due to the product they took in the arm. Fatal. And then the cases started pouring in after that. And to this day, it's still not on the consent form that this product, when you take it in the arm, can cause fatal myocarditis.
So you have one thing that I want to credit you with, because, and I don't say this to flatter you, I really genuinely mean this. I really believe that God has raised you up with your background, the education, the experience for such a time as this, to blow the whistle on what's happening and to also give people a solution. So there's a couple things I want to do. Number one, I want you to speak to the person right now who they might have gotten this inoculation. Maybe the symptoms are mild right now, or maybe they could appear later and they're kind of panicking. You have created a protocol to actually help people detoxify from this situation. So if you could please just speak to that person right now about how they can get access to that.
It's somewhere between 75 and 80% of Americans took this.
That's insane.
According to CDC, COVID states, we're trying to get an estimate on this, is probably 95% of Australians.
My goodness.
To give you an idea. I didn't take it. You didn't take it. I'm a highly accomplished doctor. It was never safe to take. Never safe to take. I published an op-ed in The Hill in August of 2020, the great gamble of doing this. It's the only public figure in the world who called out a concern before they came forward. Only one in the world. You're talking to them right now. So those who have taken it, there's great concern. I've published with Nicholas Holscher, who's a fellow at McCullough Foundation. It's one of 70 or so papers that we have on this. It's called McCullough Protocol-Based Spike Detoxification, and we have a risk stratification approach. We start with patients. The first thing we do is we characterize how many times they've had the infection, how many different doses they had in the arm, and when did they take them. The more dangerous ones were given in 2021. I want people to know that. They did become safer in 2022 and 2023. The dangerous ones were in 2021. But we characterize all that, and then we measure a blood test. We measure the antibodies against the spike protein. The products make the spike protein in the body, probably for a potentially unlimited time period and an unlimited quantity. This is the great concern. Once they're injected into the body, there appears to be no way to shut them off, and we're greatly concerned about this. The protocol involves the combined use of 3 natural products that can be used over the counter that we have found in preclinical studies in the available randomized trials is the best application to get this spike protein out of the body. And they are nattokinase, derived from the fermentation of soy, bromelain, derived from pineapples and pineapple stems, and curcumin, derived from turmeric. In combination, now other things can be added, but it's McCullough Protocol-based spike detoxification. The doses are natto, 2,000 units twice a day, bromelain, 500 milligrams a day, curcumin, 500 twice a day, and we can double or quadruple these. And so we are widely using this. I've used it now for 2 years. I've watched people steadily improve. The best available vignettes give us guidance. I've held conference calls worldwide. What are other doctors seeing? And you know what? I copyrighted it so people could locate it. They were trying to figure, what are you talking about? McCullough Protocol, so they know. So it's copyrighted my name. But it's the ultimate accountability as well. Because if this doesn't work, believe me, I would hear about this. People would be all over me on social media. And yet what I get is a constant flood of thank yous. I'm finally better. I'm finally turning the corner. It can take a year or more of doing this. But all the symptoms, the ear ringing, the numbness and tingling, the heart pounding up and down, this vague chest pain, we see blood clots resolving. Now, we use blood thinners on top of this, but we see it resolving. We do add prescription drugs, colchicine for the myocarditis and pleuropericardial symptoms. We actually use a nicotine patch to try to block the spike protein for the neurologic features. Ivermectin for some of the cutaneous and craniofacial syndromes, hyperbaric oxygen. We use multiple things in combination, but we are getting people better after the vaccine and taking that risk away that was conferred to them when they took the shot.
So we're wrapping up now. We don't have a ton of time. We will put a link for all of that information. And by the way, guys, he's given this away generously to help people. So we'll put the link for that information in the description of this episode. But if you could, in 60 seconds or so, you're clearly a man of faith. I admire your spiritual connection, your way to look at what's happening here spiritually. And for me, when I see what's happening, as a follower of Jesus myself and as a pastor, I think one of the things that Jesus teaches us when he was dying on the cross was, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And in the midst of this, I look at what's happening, and frankly, I don't know what else to call it besides evil, if not just completely incompetent. But it seems too coordinated just to be incompetent. I look at what's happening in the world, and to me, it's clearer than ever before that there is a spiritual battle between good and evil happening. This is not a battle of preferences or political parties. It's two spiritual forces at war with each other. But I'm encouraged that the force for good is going to win. That if you're on God's side, you're on the winning team. And if there's any, spiritual encouragement that you could give our audience, I'd really appreciate it.
Light over darkness. That's always the way. It's always a small number with eyes to see and ears to hear. It's always a ministry of having others take the scales off their eyes It's always the case. It is biblical. There's no doubt about it. What we are seeing is biblical. We are in an epic fight of good and evil. And I've traveled all over the world, and I've talked to Hindus and Muslims. They believe they're seeing a battle of good and evil in their context of their faith. And the same thing with Confucianists and those Jewish others. They see this. People are really wondering, what are we watching? Mm-hmm. Are we watching a form of a plague? Are we watching the end of time? Are we cast as characters? I encourage everyone to ask themselves, what is their role right now in this time of great controversy? Because I do think all of us have been cast a role, and we are being looked upon to do our part to compassionately help others through this difficult time.
Beautiful. Dr. Peter McCullough, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.